Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the North and East Plans panel. My name is Councillor Javed Akhtar, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. North and East Plans panel deals with applications from the north, east, and the east of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all relevant information from applicant, members of public, and council officers to help members of the panel to make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have introduced yourself? If we could start from the left.
Stella Spriggs, Principal Planning Officer, Development Management.
Hi, Ryan Platton, Team Leader of the North East Development Management Team.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adam Harver, Group Manager for Policy and Plans.
Hello, I'm Andrew Fosbury, Highways Development Control.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nicole Sharp, and I represent the Temple Newsham Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor David Jenkins, and I represent Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ray Jones and I represent Horsforth.
Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Michael Miller. I represent Kippax and Methley Ward.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Councillor Jim McKenna and I represent Armley.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha. I'm the clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Pippa Plumtree Varley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel today.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Hello, my name is David Newbury. I'm the Lead Planning Officer for the Plans panel.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 5, can I ask the clerk to go through item 1 and 5, please?
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 1, there's no appeals. Agenda item 2, no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items. Agenda item 4, members to declare any interest. I'll take that as none, thank you. Agenda item 5, no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of September 2023. Do members accept these minutes are the true and correct record? Anyone to move? Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Thank you, Councillor Ray. Are there any matters arising? Thank you. Item 7, could I ask the officers to present, please?
Thank you, Chair. This application is for phased development to comprise of the demolition of existing buildings and erection of a food store, use class E, a care home, use class C2, and 8 senior living homes, use class C3, with associated access, parking, servicing area, and landscaping. This application is brought to the panel as a major planning application brought at the discretion of the chair, which should be referred to the plans panel for determination because of the significance, impact and sensitivity of the proposal. That is under exception 1G of the officer scheme of delegation. Board members have all shown an interest in the scheme with concerns raised and queries raised. And at the time of the publication of the report, no formal written comments have been submitted, but that has since changed, and that will be addressed in the update later on in the presentation. At the time of the publication of the report, 122 objection comments, including from Wetherby Town Council, Wetherby Civic Society, the Leeds Civic Trust, and the Better Wetherby Partnership were received. 611 support comments were received, around 3/4 of which were on a standard template letter understood to have been circulated by the applicant. The proposal is recommended for refusal on 6 grounds. 1, the principle of prejudicing the delivery of a housing site. 2, the principle of out-of-town retail. 3, heritage impacts. 4, amenity impacts. 5 landscape impacts, and 6 highways impacts in the absence of a completed Section 106 legal agreement. A pre-application was submitted for the scheme in early 2022. Officers advised of concerns in relation to the principle of retail development in this location and did not encourage the submission of an application. Concerns were also raised in relation to the detail of the scheme regarding the relationship between the on-site uses, landscaping, and highways matters. There was also a previously withdrawn application for a scheme of a similar nature, which was withdrawn in January 2023. Officers again advised about concerns in relation to the principle of the development and the fundamental policy conflicts associated with this. Here we have the aerial of the site. You can see that it is north of the A58, which runs along the southern boundary of the site. It's opposite the designated green belts outside of the settlement of Wetherby. And it is positioned at this point, which is a southernmost gateway to Wetherby. There's residential development to all sides. So on the eastern side, you have Boston Road, Micklethwaite View and Grange View, and to the north, Micklethwaite Grove, and the west, Ings Walk. It's adjacent to the Wetherby Conservation Area, with the eastern boundary shared, that is along Boston Road, shared with the Wetherby Conservation Area. So it is within the setting of the Wetherby Conservation Area. Grange View, to the north of this element of the site, that is considered a non-designated heritage asset. The listed building within the setting is the West Lodge, which can be found to the east of the application site, just on the other side of the roundabout here. The site is within strategic green infrastructure, and there are a number of TPO protected trees on the site within the southwestern corner here, along the northern boundary of the site, and around the site access as well. There are also a number of individual TPO protected trees within the site. The site is an allocated housing site with an indicative capacity of 86 units outside of the Wetherby Town Centre and beyond what is considered the edge of the Wetherby Town Centre, defined by being 300 metres from the primary shopping frontages. Ings Walk to the west of the site, that is land that has been brought forward under that is part of the housing allocation as well. Sorry, is it? Okay, sorry. So Ings Walk to the west of the site, that's been brought forward for housing already. That is part of the housing allocation, and that comprises 7 units. Here we have the red line boundary of the application, so you can see the existing hotel building, the parking associated with it in the eastern portion of the site, and to the western portion of the site, as we saw from the aerial imagery, that is the greenfield area of the site. Here we have a view of the application site from the A168 as it comes to the roundabout with the A58. So you can see the low nature of the structure as existing and the long visibility of the site. You can also see the gateway location of the site as you're entering into Wetherby. So you can see the listed building on the right hand side of the screen, just behind the trees there in this area. You can also see the non-designated heritage asset of Grange View glimpsed in views behind the hotel just here. You can see Ings Walk development, which is housing development that was already brought forward and forms part of the housing allocation. That's to the left-hand side of the screen. And you can also see the sloping land levels within the setting, so land dropping in level as it moves towards the east. As well as that, you can see the number of trees within the setting and the importance that landscaping has to the setting. As well as this, you can see the general scale of development within the area, sort of being quite low slung in height. Here we have a closer view of the hotel as viewed from the roundabout on the closer side. So again, you can see the non-designated heritage asset of Grange View in the background, as indicated on screen here. And you can see the single story nature of the structure in this location and the parking around the frontage. Here we have a view from the A58 looking east, so towards the application site, which is around here. You can see Ings Walk in the foreground, so that is the part of the housing allocation that's already been brought forward. And you can see the importance of landscaping in the setting and the screening that existing trees offer for the application site. Again, you can see the land levels as they drop as you move eastwards along the A58 here. Here we have an image of the frontage of the hotel looking east. So with the fence along the eastern site boundary forming the boundary with the Wetherby Conservation Area. You can also see the parking to front and the large verge area, which is outside of the application site boundary. You see the sort of setback from the pavement that is resulting from having that car parking to front. And then this is the frontage of the hotel looking west. And again, you can see the glimpse views of Grange View, the non-designated heritage asset in the background there. Here we have a closer view of Grange View and the non-designated heritage asset and a TPA protected tree in the foreground here. You can see 12 Boston Road, which is positioned within the Wetherby Conservation Area and with that fence forming the boundary with the Wetherby Conservation Area. You can see the slightly lower level that the property at Boston Road is set at. It's also worth noting that 12 Boston Road is considered a positive building within the Wetherby Conservation Area appraisal. Here we have a view of Micklethwaite View, which fronts onto the application site. The terrace of 3 properties and car parking to serve Micklethwaite View and Grange View is proposed to be incorporated within the development, which is understood to be a continuation of an existing arrangement. Here we have a view of Micklethwaite View, the properties to the north of the application site. So you can see that these are 3-storey in height predominantly. You can also see the simple and traditional forms of these with the townhouse stylings, the use of brick, render and stone, and the roof slope fronting the street of Micklethwaite Grove itself. You can see the green area in the foreground, that's the greenfield area of the site, and some of the existing trees on the right-hand side of the image. And again, you can have a sense of the sloping land levels within the site as well. Here we have a view of the site positioned in the southwestern corner, looking north along the western boundary of the site. So this shows the land levels and the existing level of the hotel in relation to the embankment and the higher land levels along this portion of the site. You can also see the importance of landscaping along this boundary and the screening that offers to the development. And here we have a view from within the site, from the greenfield area of the site, looking west towards Ings Walk, the more recent housing developments. So here we have a map of the Wetherby Conservation Area, which has 3 character areas. The character area adjacent to the application site is the Riverside character area. You can see the hotel indicated towards the bottom of the image here. So that is the application site. It doesn't have Ings Walk or Micklethwaite Grove constructed on this map at the time. They're around there. You can see the listed building, the grade 2 listed building, which is West Lodge, is marked with a star here. So it is considered a landmark structure on that southern entrance into southern gateway into Wetherby, excuse me. You can also see 12 Boston Road indicated as a positive building here. And I'll point out again, the non-designated heritage asset is just considered to, that's just here on the map. Here we have the Wetherby Town Centre boundary, as indicated with the blue line running around there. So you can just see the application site is just at the bottom of the image here. The primary shopping frontages are shown in red and secondary shopping frontages are shown in green. So you can see the market square and the town hall here and the shopping frontages there. This is the existing Morrison's building and the horse fair centre is within the image here. Here we have some of the existing retail provision shown. So you can see the Morrison's within the town boundary there. Again, that's the Wetherby Town Centre boundary as designated, shown in the blue shading there. So you can see there's a Morrison's store, an M&S food hall and a Sainsbury's local within there. Then there is an Aldi outside of that boundary and co-op as well on Ainstey Road. So that shows the sort of existing provision, and then alongside obviously all of the independent retailers and services that are within Wetherby Town Centre itself. Here we have the site layout plan for the proposal. So you can see the food store on the western side of the site. The care home, which is this H plan form to the southern boundary of the site. And then you can see the senior living homes, which are 8 different units positioned. There's 2 terraces here, 4 and then 3 dwellings, and then a single dwelling here. So these are the 2-bed units, the 3-bed units, and then the single dwelling here is the 4-bed unit that is proposed. The access that is proposed is slightly to the west of the existing access, so this will be forming a new access to the sites with the existing access being closed. You can also see areas where new planting is proposed, as well as existing planting that is retained along the southwestern boundary of the site. Here we have a CGI visual of the sites, just to sort of indicate the scale in relation to things. So this is sort of useful to see for scale, but I would note that it doesn't include the landscaping features as indicated on the landscape master plan. So it doesn't include the fencing along the front boundary, for example, and the sort of specific details of that, including the pergola structures, the sort of hard landscaping that is included within the landscaping plans that have been submitted. Here we have some section drawings, again showing the relative scale of the development within the setting. So you can see the properties to Ings Walk on the left-hand side of the lower section here, relative to the Lidl building shown here. Then these are the senior living homes, the care home, and then you can see Grange View. Sorry, the mouse is just not catching up with me. Grange View on the right hand side and Boston Road beyond that at the lower level there. On the top image you can see the care home, so this is section sort of north-south slice, so you can see the care home in relation to Grange View and the properties of Micklethwaite View and then Micklethwaite Grove beyond. So here we have the elevations of the proposed food store. It's quite a standard template form for food stores of this retailer. So you can see that there is indicative signage shown on there for the Lidl store. However, that is indicative in nature only, and that would be subject to an advertisement consent as applicable. You can see the glazing on the southern elevation, which predominates the frontage that would be towards the A58. And then stone is proposed to the eastern and southern areas of the elevations and the public facing areas, essentially, with areas of render to the western and northern sides. Here we have the floor plan for the food store. So you can see it's got the sales area in the middle there, and then the warehouse is to the northern side, as well as the staff areas, with staff welfare areas within the first floor, which is quite limited, sort of fitted into that single pitch roof space there. You can also see some of the parent and child parking provision, and that there's a customer WC included, which is has a changing space and is disabled access friendly. Here is the roof plan for the store. So this is to indicate that there are photovoltaic cells to the roof as proposed. And here we have a section drawing which indicates the food store and the delivery bay towards the north of the site in relation to the properties on Micklethwaite Grove. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the sections as existing, and then on the right-hand side, this shows various sections as proposed. So you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, that shows the front of the delivery area and its relative level in relation to the garden area and the properties of Micklethwaite Grove themselves. Now moving to the care home. So this shows the northern and the eastern elevations of the care home. So the northern elevation is that which will be facing towards Grange View, the non-designated heritage assets. This is also where the main access into the building is. So this is sort of the public facing access in a way. It's where people will come and go from the building. So that is contained sort of within the site itself rather than onto the A58. And then the eastern elevation is that which will be facing onto the property at 12 Boston Road. So you can see the mansard roof form here, the stone proposed for most of the elevations, and then elements of render included, as well as some larger areas of glazing as well. You can see too that it is 3 stories in height for the majority, and then 4 stories on the western elements. So this shows the southern elevation, which will front the A58 and that gateway location into Wetherby. And this shows the western elevation, which will be adjacent to the main access in and out of the site. So as you're going in and out of the food store and to the senior living homes, this will be the elevation that's most visible. So these are probably the most visible of the elevations. Again, you can see it's predominantly stone. It's got a green wall feature here, as well as elements of render. And there are some balconies proposed on the western elevation. Also to this side, there is a roof terrace area, which is proposed for the use of the residents, and that's to the 4-story element of the building. Here we have the sections of the building just to show the inside elevations of that H plan form. So again, it's render and green wall features as well as a stone. Here we have the ground floor of the building. So you can see that H plan form with the different wings proposed. So each of these has their own atrium space and shared facilities, each of the different sections of the H. You can see the main entrance is taken from the northern side, as coming in here. And then you can see the areas of garden around the edge of the building, with the pavement of the A58 running along here with the verge beyond. They're very similar plan form at the first floor level, again with bedrooms around shared central spaces. This shows the second floor, which has activity rooms, including a training area, cinema room, a spa and salon within the eastern wing of the building. And here we have the third floor, which includes the plant room to service the building, and also the rooftop terrace area for the benefit of residents. Here we have some CGI images of the proposal. So this is showing the southern elevation on the bottom image, and that's the one that will be fronting the A58, and then the western elevation in the top image. So that'll be fronting onto the site access. Again, I would say that these are indicative in nature, so they show that some of the scale, but they don't include the hard landscaping features such as the fencing, which is indicated to the landscape plans that have been provided. So here we have the floor plans for house type 1 of the senior living homes. So these are 4 3-bed dwellings with accommodation across 3 floors. To note here, you can see the shape of the garden areas for these properties. So you have quite a standard shape for the plot 1 on the left-hand side, but as you move across, the shape of these gardens does vary. So you can see quite an angled boundary here for plot 2. Then you can see an L-shaped garden to serve plot 3. And then you can see a much shorter plot to serve plot 4. You can also see the angled design of the floor plan across all of the floors here, but you can see the windows to the kitchen dining area with plots 2 and 3 being within the utility rooms that are serving each of these properties. To note as well, there's no sort of formal front garden area to each of these properties, so there's a buffer of around 2 meters with some planting indicated here. You can also see that parking is to front, so there isn't a front garden area as such. So here we have the elevations of house type 1. So here you can see they are quite contemporary in terms of their glazing stylings, with quite large areas of glazing and variation in glazing styles within the different properties here. You can also see that these are gable fronted dwellings, so each property having its own gable frontage rather than a simple roof form, as is more sort of characteristic of that area. You can also see the angled nature of the elevations, which you can see in the side views here, just how the building form is shaped. Here we have the floor plans and elevations for house type 2. So this is a row of 3 2-bed dwellings. Again, you can see the car parking on the frontage. So no front garden areas to these properties either. And you can see the angled nature of the plot boundary between plots 5 and 6. You can also see the relative distance from those main rear windows to the boundary as well. And here we have house type 3. So this is 1 4-bed dwelling, which is the southernmost of the senior dwelling units. Again, you can see the quite kind of contemporary arrangement of the glazing to these elevations, so quite large areas of glazing, the spacing from glazing to the eaves, lack of header and sill details for the window openings. And then you can also see with the plot layout, the distance between the main windows to the kitchen dining area and the distance to the boundary of the garden. So you can see here, this is the private garden space serving this dwelling. So the car park is to the left-hand side of this, and then the access road to the senior living dwellings and the care homes running around the site here. So you can see the relative position in relation to the other elements of the scheme. And here we have a CGI image which shows the care home, that western elevation with the render elements, and the senior living homes on the left-hand side. Again, these don't show the full extent of the hard landscaping which is proposed. So here we have the indicative, the site landscaping that is proposed and the overall landscaping to the site. So you can see the extent of hard standing shown. So this is to serve as the access and the car parking to these different areas of the site. So whilst these are indicated in different shades, these are all hard surfaced areas. So you can see in the orange and the brown there, as well as the grey and this sort of shaded area, that is all hard standing parking, but with slightly different surfacing materials. You can also see the extent of patio areas around the care home and the relative proximity of the care home to the southern boundary of the site and to its other boundaries, and the extent of private amenity space that would be available for those occupants. Here we've got a closer view of the landscaping that is proposed to the senior living units and the care home. So again, you can see the extent of the patio and the hard surfacing and the relative size of the garden areas that are proposed. You can see indicated tree planting within this portion of the site, but it is largely within private garden areas rather than creating sort of a tree-lined street scene there. Then finally, this is just showing the hard landscaping that is proposed. So you can again see the extent of patio areas that are proposed, and that these are actually sort of attached to certain ground floor bedrooms rather than it would appear that these are attached to those bedrooms rather than for the general use of all of the bedrooms across the care home. So you can see in particular this sort of distance is 4 meters, so that gives you an idea of the scale of the area that is available for use of residents, and the outlook as a 1.8 meter high boundary treatment is proposed along that southern site boundary of the care home. This is a little bit closer in, so it's probably a little easier to see here. So again, you can see the extent of patio and that these serve particular bedrooms. So here, these are each separated out for different bedrooms, and similar on the eastern side here. And also you can see the position of the fence that is proposed along the southern boundary of the site. So some soft landscaping is also proposed along that boundary, but very little room is allowed for that. So whether it would successfully establish right up against a proposed boundary fence is something to consider. There's also pergola structures and various different structures within the garden area for the benefit of the residents. So in terms of the reasons for refusal, the first reason for refusal is in relation to the principle of prejudicing the delivery of a housing site. So this is a site allocated for housing in the site allocations plan, with the overall site having an indicative site capacity of 86 units. 7 of these have been brought forward in the Ings Walk development to the west of the application site. The proposal includes a substantial portion of the site for non-housing use. It prejudices the delivery for housing by using such a substantial portion of that site for a non-housing use. And it prejudices the plan-based approach within the spatial framework that is adopted in Leeds. It also raises questions as to where such housing would be delivered in the absence of delivery of housing to allocated housing sites, and whether this would result in pressure on greenfield sites. The second reason for refusal is in relation to the principle of out-of-centre retail. The proposal is out of centre, so out of Wetherby Town Centre or any other designated centre, and it is beyond what is considered the edge of centre. This is contrary to the centre's first approach, which is set out within the core strategy and the National Planning Policy Framework. Whilst the sequential test has been satisfied, it is not considered that the retail impact assessment is robust in its assumptions, and it's not considered to be adequate. This is considered to result in a significantly adverse impact to Wetherby Town Centre and its vitality and viability. It's considered the impact to Morrison's is underestimated within the details submitted and the associated linked trips to the town centre as a whole. And this represents the second reason for refusal. The third reason for refusal is in relation to harm to heritage assets. The site is within the setting of a listed building, the setting of Wetherby Conservation Area, and the setting of a non-designated heritage asset. The proposal is out of keeping with this setting, with the care home visually overwhelming as a result of its location within the site and insufficient landscaping and buffer in relation to the rest of the site. This is considered to represent less than substantial harm to designated heritage assets, and great weight should be given to the assets conservation where they are designated. There's not considered to be clear and convincing justification for the harm identified to designated heritage assets. It also serves to impact the significance of a non-designated heritage asset at Grange View. When considered against the harm to designated assets and the overall harms identified, the balanced view is that the harm identified is unacceptable in relation to the non-designated heritage asset because of the scale of the proposal and relative positioning. Reason for refusal 4 is in relation to impact to trees and on-site landscaping proposed. It's considered that the proposal includes insufficient mitigation for the trees lost as a result of the developments, results in impact to retained trees, and has a poor relationship to the context. This includes impact to TPO protected trees, and it impacts the spatial relationship to the landscape in the setting. So the buffers that are currently existing to the site and the relationship to the open land beyond in the key gateway location. To note on this point, the officer report does not include spatial reference to spatial strategic green infrastructure spatial policy 13. This is asked to be added into the reason for refusal in relation to landscape, as this is the underlying strategic policy that underpins the landscape policies that are referenced within that refusal. So that is an omission from the report and sought to be added. Reason for refusal 5 is in relation to amenity concerns, with the proposal considered to represent a poor standard of amenity for its future residents. This is in relation to poor outlook, with distances to boundary from main rear windows and frontage windows falling below guideline distances. Poor garden areas in terms of their shape, usability, and sunlight that would access them in the case of the care home in particular. And a poor relationship between the on-site uses, so having the senior living homes immediately adjacent to the car park for the food store and the associated comings goings for such a high use area. There's only a 1 metre buffer between the car park and the senior living homes and their garden areas, which represents a concern. The rear of plot 8, for example, is only 5 metres away from the car park itself. The final reason for refusal is in relation to highways impacts in the absence of a completed Section 106 agreement. And while during the course of negotiations, a number of mitigation proposals were considered and ultimately then considered to be acceptable by highways officers, in the absence of having a mechanism to secure such works, where we are proceeding to recommend officer refusal, to avoid costly and abortive works to both parties, we don't have a Section 106 agreement in place for that. So that reason for refusal is there because we haven't got the mechanism to secure the works that would be necessary to ensure that it's acceptable in highways impacts terms. In relation to that reason for refusal, there is an omission in the officer report in relation to policy D2 of the Wetherby Neighbourhood Plan. This is very similar in nature to the other policies referenced, but it does relate to the connectivity of new developments and securing appropriate mitigation for such developments. So this is an update to the officer report, but it's not considered to prejudice the considerations into that reason for refusal. In terms of the update since the publication of the report, as a point of clarification for paragraph 157 of the officer report, it should reference Wetherby Neighbourhood Plan policy ENV1 rather than ENV2 as is referenced within the report. ENV1 is referenced within the reason for refusal and is discussed within the proposal. It's just a slight error there rather than ENV2. Further comments have been received in support of the application. These raise points previously made in earlier submissions, as set out within the officer report, but can be broadly summarised as follows. In light of housing growth, there is a need for additional retail facilities. Many residents and businesses desire another supermarket, and it will provide more local choice, negating the need to travel further afield. The representations received include a 275 signature petition in support of the proposal, and approximately further 15 individual comments have been received as well, again in support of the proposal. Further objection comments have also been received, with concerns in relation to the traffic implications for Wetherby Town Centre, the scale of the development, amenity, and the sequential test. And so these comments, whilst noted, are not considered to raise any new or significant matters which have not already been considered and addressed in the assessment of the application. Also received an objection from Councillors Lamb and Councillor Harrington, Wetherby ward members, which I'll read in full here. Given the strength of feeling and level of interest in this application, we have maintained a neutral position through the consultation process in order that we can carefully consider the views of our constituents and the responses of consultees. We have tried to engage proactively with Lidl and their agents, and while we have had a couple of meetings, it felt very much like a token effort to tick a box rather than a meaningful attempt to work with us and our community. We would very much welcome a Lidl store in Wetherby. Additional competition and additional jobs would be a boost to the town and would be supported by many residents. We strongly feel, however, that the proposed site would be the wrong location for the following reasons. 1. The site is allocated for much needed older people's housing to meet an identified need in both the core strategy and Wetherby neighbourhood plan. The proposed plan does not meet this need in full and would require additional land to be found for housing in the area. 2. Allowing a supermarket on land allocated for housing would prejudice other allocated sites and fundamentally undermine a plan-led approach to development. 3. The proposed residential accommodation would not have appropriate amenity or green space. 4. The site is bound by housing on 3 sides. The proposals would be overbearing on the current residential properties and have a significant impact on their amenity. 5. The proposed access to the site would have a severe negative impact on the adjacent roundabout and the road network, which is the main gateway to Wetherby and already regularly congested. The majority of trips would be by car, which does not fit with our efforts to tackle the climate emergency. 6. An out-of-town centre supermarket would be harmful to shops in the identified district centre and would be contrary to core strategy and neighbourhood plan policies. There are suitable sites available within the designated town centre boundary. We made Lidl aware of this, but they were unwilling to discuss or explore any alternatives. We remain open to having constructive dialogue with them around this. And 7, we have concerns about the design and layout, but these are moot points given the issues of principle outlined above. We support the officer recommendation to refuse planning permission on this site. We very much hope the applicants will accept the decision and now commit to working proactively with us and the wider community to find a suitable alternative site to be delivered and enable the allocated site to be delivered in full for its intended purpose. So that's the objection from Councillor Lamb and Councillor Harrington there. We've also received representations from the Better Wetherby Partnership and Wetherby Civic Society, which reiterate, and Wetherby Town Council, which reiterate their earlier objections in relation to the scheme. So to summarise, the proposal serves to deliver the following planning benefits. It would provide an additional food store for Wetherby, widening consumer choice. It is to a largely brownfield site. It does have proximity to the road network, allowing for easy access by private car. It delivers 8 senior living homes and an 84-bed care home. It's compliant with relevant climate change policies in relation to carbon dioxide reduction, sustainability standards, and electric vehicle charging points. And it would result in the creation of jobs during the construction and operational phases of the development. These are all acknowledged benefits of the proposal. However, the proposal would prejudice the delivery of an allocated housing site. using a significant portion of the site for a non-housing use. This is considered to significantly and fundamentally undermine the plan-led approach in Leeds. Saved UDP policy GP1 states alternative land uses should not be accepted where a site has been allocated for a particular land use. The proposal would be contrary to this policy. The site is needed for housing to meet identified local housing need in Wetherby and North East Leeds, as well as across the Leeds City Council district as a whole. No market housing or affordable housing, as would be anticipated by the SAP allocation as a designated housing site, would be delivered as a result of the proposal. And furthermore, this out of centre location for a main town centre use, including the food store, would result in a significant adverse impact on the vitality and vibrancy of Wetherby Town Centre. The assumptions set out within the relevant assessments are not considered to be fully evidenced, and it's considered the location of the site is unlikely to result in linked trips because of the edge of town location. This is contrary to the established centres first approach as set out in the development plan and the MPPF. Putting all the principal matters to one side, there are significant concerns in relation to the detail of the scheme. There's a poor relationship between the on-site uses, a poor standard of amenity for future occupiers of the site through insufficient outlook and private amenity space. There's a poor relationship to the context, including designated heritage assets and non-designated locally valued heritage assets. There's insufficient landscaping to the site so as to provide appropriate buffers to the development visually and in amenity terms. There is impact to existing on-site trees. Alongside this, there is a failure to provide a completed Section 106 agreement. So this serves to provide insufficient mitigation for the anticipated highways impacts as a result of the proposal. Taking into account all of the above in the planning balance, the overwhelming case is considered that the planning balance weighs against the proposal. The officer recommendation is for refusal, with the amendments to the reasons for refusal to include reference to policies SP13 for the landscape reason for refusal and policy D2 of the Wetherby Neighbourhood Plan for the highways reason for refusal as detailed within the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. That's been really helpful. Before we move on, can I ask David to just if you have any further comments on this particular matter, especially where a lot of members received emails from many of Wetherby residents. So if you can just quickly update us with that as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just really want to say just a few words. I suppose it comes down to a matter of process and whether it's so safe to proceed, because officers and members have received an awful lot of correspondence in the time immediately before this plans panel meeting. We've obviously received a lot of correspondence during the course of the application, but in the sort of the hours and days leading up to this plans panel, we've both received a lot of correspondence. And you can understand why people want, it's a democracy, obviously, and members of the public want their views to be known and to be taken into account. But when you get, from an officer perspective, I'll speak about this first, when you get such a volume of correspondence, and sometimes it goes into quite a lot of detail, it's very difficult to be able to deal with that and process that and make members of the plans panel aware of everything that we've received in that nature in the very short time period that exists. Nevertheless, we've had the application with us for 7 months. There has been a statutory publicity period. We've received an awful lot of representations in respect to the application. You've got a very comprehensive report in front of you. You've just had a very comprehensive presentation as well. And the advice from officers is it's perfectly safe to proceed and determine the application as it's being presented to you. In terms of with members, and I don't necessarily want to put words into members' mouths here, but again, it's equally difficult for members to be able to cope with a large volume of correspondence coming in immediately before a plans panel. The duty that's placed upon members of the plans panel is obviously to look at the applications impartially and address the planning applications and deal with them on their planning merits. That means having a look at how the policy or how the proposal sits against policies of the development plan, That's the primary test. And then secondly, whether there are other planning considerations which are such importance, which need to be taken account and applied weight accordingly. So it's not, what I'm trying to say, it's not a popularity or a beauty contest as such. Certainly, if it was a beauty contest, probably a popularity contest, I wouldn't be here at all, wouldn't have no part to play in this. But members have to enter this plans panel with an open mind, and it would be wrong to think that members would be influenced by material that comes in late in the day, which is targeted to them and outside of the formal planning process. Of course, accordingly, then members are perfectly entitled to either set those representations to one side or just simply not place any weight on them in the decision-making process. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Where an application is recommended for refusal, the public speaking protocol for planning is slightly different. Could I ask the legal officers to outline how we will proceed?
Thank you. So where an application is recommended for refusal, members will probably already be aware that the public speaking protocol is slightly different. So I thought it would be helpful just to outline it once again as a reminder. If there is a speaker who has registered their intention to speak in support, or the applicant themselves, then they can speak, and any objectors. Earlier in the week, we had notification that the speaker who had registered to speak in support was not going to come to panel today, and therefore the two objectors who had also wished to speak were informed accordingly that they had no rights to speak at panel. So there won't be any speakers today. I do understand that the two gentlemen who were going to speak in support are here today, but the only instance where they will have an opportunity to speak directly to you is if the chair thinks in his discretion that you as members might be minded to go against the officer recommendation, and then chair can use his discretion to give them an opportunity to speak if they wish to do so. But as it stands at the moment, we won't have any public speaking.
Thank you. That was helpful. Do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. Just on page 23, I've highlighted it. One of the objectors says there's no need for an additional supermarket because the extension to Morrison's has been approved. Can we just have a bit more information on that, please?
I'm happy to take this one, Chair, if that's okay. Yes, so and kindly, Councillor Sharp pre-warned me of this question beforehand so that we could prepare an answer. The most recent approval for an extension at the Morrison's supermarket, which I think is the one being referred to, but I can go into a little bit more of the history if needed. We granted permission in November 2021 for an extension to the home delivery part of the operation. So it was a relatively small extension to the supermarket itself. It was 222 square meters. Didn't include an extension to the sales floor area at all. It was just in response to the increased demand that the store were receiving for home deliveries. So that is the most recent one. Prior to that, we had a number of applications which all began in 2012, where we had the demolition of a number of smaller retail units and an increase in the size of the store of around about 600 square meters. Now that came to plans panel in November 2012, was ultimately granted, and then it was ultimately varied a few times by other submissions. But again, a relatively modest increase to the sales floor area as well. Around about 600 square meters, I think it was just above that, about 610 for the sales area. So we haven't had any significant extension to the store in recent history, and those are the two most recent. We did have a planning application which we approved last month, which was for new plant equipment to the roof, but that didn't impact on the size of the store or the floor area.
You okay with that, Councillor Sharp? Sorry, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, it was just a clarification in terms of national policy as well, in terms of that word need. It used to be the case in the old PPS 6 that you did need to demonstrate the need for an out-of-centre supermarket, but that was removed from the NPPF. So there isn't a requirement for a development such as this to demonstrate that there is a need for it.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, it's just on the paragraph 14, senior living homes, and we've always got 3 2-beds, 4 3-beds, and then 1 4-bed. I just want to ask what we know as the demand for 4-bed homes for senior stroke retirement living, because whenever I've attended any meetings and discussions and looked at anything, people are looking to downsize, and what we get is we're being asked questions like, well, we need more bungalows, 2-bedroom bungalows, that kind of answer when we speak to people in the city about this, because people of that age are looking to, they've had a 4-bed house and they're looking to downsize, and they're looking for something, a 2-bed, possibly a 3, but more bungalows, and that kind of, or an apartment, so I'm just perplexed as to why we're building the developer is building a 4-bed senior living house, and what demand we know we have for that. I'm just worried that this is not going to end up being a senior living house or something. It's a 4-bed house, which doesn't seem to make sense.
I'm also happy to take that as well, Councillor Hazelwood. Yes, certainly the questions that you've raised, I think, were at the forefront of our minds when we looked at the scheme as well. I mean, what I would say in relation to that part of the development, that those senior living homes are for the over 55. So you could easily envisage a situation where somebody who was 55 or over by not a very large amount maybe did have grown-up children, for example, that lived there. So whilst we don't have any particular data or information in terms of the particular demand for people in those scenarios, the officer view certainly was that we did envisage that there could be, certainly reasonably could be, demand for larger units. And the appellant has obviously responded to our housing mix policy on that point as well, by looking to provide a variation of mix which meets policy H4. So I suspect there's a dual intention there in terms of wanting to meet policy in the one instance, but wanting to be flexible enough for those circumstances that do arise where people may have dependents or grown-up children, for example.
Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, in that case, then that kind of defeats the object of what the developer's trying to do, because this is supposed to. It says here that it's a care home, and I'm sorry, obviously, if the developer was here, I'd be asking him these questions. So apologies, I'm having to ask you yourselves, because the senior living homes are going to be operated by the care home. And it does say with care services installed into the dwellings as required. So these are meant to be houses for people who are retiring, who are looking to downsize. I'm 52, so I could go buy one in 3 years' time. I'm not looking to retire or downsize.
Glad to hear that.
I know. He's stuck with me. So I'm just kind of, I don't understand why we're building a 4-bed house in this setting. And that for me, who is absolutely in favour of building more houses, we could have another couple of or 3 2-bedroom houses, which people of that age are asking us for in the city. So I'm just a little perplexed still. I understand what you're saying. I'm worried that this 4-bed house is not going to be for its intended use, is what I'm saying, for people who are downsizing and retiring.
Councillor Hazelwood, I think that was more of a comment, so we'll come back to the comments. Let's have the questions for officers at this stage. Any questions? Yeah, it's because we don't have any public speakers, so it won't be fair. Can we just move on to the questions to the officers from the members? Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Chair. Officers have put a significant weight on this being a plan-led process. So can you just talk us through the process of how this site was allocated? So it's currently a hotel. So presumably the decision was made by the council to make this a housing site, presumably through the site allocations process, was it?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Stevenson. It was allocated through the site allocations plan process. So consulted on a number of times and then ultimately adopted in 2019 as part of the site allocations plan.
So what would happen if somebody came forward with a proposal to demolish the existing hotel and build a new hotel with a restaurant, bar, etc., that kind of development in it? Would that be refused on the basis that it's now an allocated housing site?
I think obviously that's a hypothetical question because we don't have that application in front of us, but it would have the same considerations that this application would have. The difference is that unlike, say, the retail application, there would be no additional impact because it's already a hotel. So whilst normally you would have to consider impact assessment because it is a town centre use, a hotel, and it would be out of centre still, you could reasonably say, well, the level of impact is comparable to what's already there because it's already a hotel. That's clearly not the case in this application because there isn't a food store there at the moment. So that would be a fundamental difference between those two applications, I suppose, in a hypothetical scenario.
I just asked because I noted in some of the comments that came in, I think there was a view that they'd still like a hotel in the vicinity, but we have to be, so from decision makers, quite clear that you've now allocated this as a housing site. So there will at some point be houses of some nature or housing on that site now. Yeah. So on that basis, then, is it housing in general or specifically elderly accommodation that we've allocated that site for?
So it's been allocated for housing in general under HG 220, which is the housing allocation. Within that allocation, there's a site requirement that says that the site will also be supported for elderly accommodation and stroke independent living under policy HG4 of the site allocations plan. So it's not a requirement that it has to be elderly accommodation as a whole. That would just be part of the mix.
And so if a developer came forward to build 79 houses on that site, which seems quite a small site for 79 houses, would it be the case that the 35% that has to be social housing in that scenario, would the council be able to assign that 35% was for elderly, or is that dealt with completely separately?
That would be dealt with separately. Yeah.
Okay. I think I understand the allocation now and where it's at. So you've taken a site out of employment use and made it housing in terms of the allocation. So within the area, is there allocated employment land? I think that would be the entire outer northeast area, I think, in terms of how the plan's made. So is there alternative allocated employment land elsewhere?
Just for clarification, the hotel wouldn't count as employment land, so it doesn't fall within an employment land use. It's a leisure use in accordance with the NPPF and the use class order. So it wouldn't count as, say, B2, B8, B1. So it's not a like for like comparison. In answer to your question, obviously within the local area, we've got sites such as at Thorpe Arch that obviously have got employment allocations on them. So there are employment allocations around. Unlike housing, though, the employment allocation targets that are set out in the core strategy aren't on an area by area basis. So for housing, there are area specific targets, as you'll be aware, Councillor Stevenson, but for employment, it doesn't work that way. It's district wide targets.
Just for clarification then, so Stella made reference to a knock-on consequence if this was approved, part of it for retail, being that we'd then have to find land elsewhere as such to make up the shortfall. So is that the case that because it's in the outer northeast area, the housing market characteristic area, so if this was approved today, that technically would mean that you'd have to find, or you could have to find, or an applicant could possibly challenge in terms of land supply, additional homes right across the area. So Boston Spa, Bramham, Collingham, all those areas would have to find additional land to deliver houses as a result of having retail on this site. Is that a correct understanding?
You could work one of two ways, I suppose. So obviously you'll be aware we were embarking upon the Leeds Local Plan 2040 process. So it would potentially require additional sites to be found from this area to meet the needs that the upcoming strategic housing market assessments likely to show for this area. But also, as you say, applications within this area, certainly the argument against the targets set out a clear target for, say, the outer northeast area. This would therefore show a reduction against that and the loss of those sites. So it would be, I can't surmise what an argument an applicant might make for an alternative site in this area, but they could suggest that the loss of this site therefore requires an additional site in another area. We'd obviously have to deal with that as that application came in, if that was to be such an argument.
My final question, I forgot one more, was just about
I think the best thing will be when you ask questions, you can ask them in all one, rather than, I can understand and I absolutely agree with yourself, but I think there are other members as well. So if you have any questions, so if you can just sum them up like 2 or 3 at the time, so it might be easier. So this is the final one, by the way.
Well, as a decision maker, I need to ask all the questions that, yeah. Well, it's fine, but some questions arise out of what's being discussed. So if I'm going to make this decision in proper form, I need to ask the questions. In terms of the care home element then, so I get the impression we're saying that that's accepted in terms of its use. Yeah. So you mentioned in paragraph, I think it's 117, that because it's a care home, a single bed, that it's only half the allocation. So you've allocated 80 houses on 79 homes to this site. But if it was all just a care home, for example, you'd need, am I right in thinking that'd be 158 bed care home? I double the number. And is that site big enough in the site assessment that you made from the site allocations plan to accommodate that level of that size of a care home facility?
I don't know whether the site is big enough to accommodate that amount of a care home facility in terms of the size that it is. I would probably look to Stella and Ryan whether that was the case or not.
I think it's difficult to sort of speak to the hypothetical scheme on that point, but it would have to be judged against all of the policy considerations that we've been judging this proposal against. So again, we'd be looking for the landscaping, the impact, the design, and the same way that we would for any scheme that came forward on that particular site. But it's sort of impossible in the position that we're in to speak to a hypothetical scheme in that sense.
Councillor Anderson and then Councillor McKenna.
Just clarity's sake, in terms of the reasons that you've set for refusal, you've not made any comment about site layout, design, etc. You've made a critique on it on paragraphs 145 and 173. They're there. So why have you not put that in reasons for refusal? The reason I'm thinking of that is if it was to go to appeal, can conclusions be drawn that you're happy with that and that those items could not be discussed at any appeal hearing because you've by implied you're happy? Or should there be something in the reasons for refusal as well?
So the design policy that underpins all of those is mentioned within each of those 3 reasons for refusal in relation to the detailed matters. So there's P10 is referenced in terms of the landscaping concerns, in terms of the amenity concerns, and also in relation to the heritage impacts. So each of those elements pick up the concern in relation to the site layout, which is in terms of the insufficient landscaping, in terms of its scale, and in terms of the amenity impact. So whilst there's not a separate reason for that, it's within each of those reasons. So it's the common thread within those that the site layout results in these impacts, these harms that are identified in those 3 terms.
Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. I think Stella has gone a little way to answering the question I was going to ask, but perhaps I can ask in a different way. Clearly, there's an awful lot of tree loss on there, and it'll have to be accommodated off-site. But it hasn't been identified where that might be. And obviously, on some of the planning panels, we're finding that more and more difficult to relocate trees, as we don't often have the council land to do it. And then again, we would have to negotiate with private landlords. And I think we need to know that before we just ignore the fact that so many trees lost. Now, I know biodiversity net gain is not law yet. And I understand now it's going to come in January instead of November. But it seems to me that does this scheme meet biodiversity net gain, the 10% plus? I'd certainly like to know that, because again, across the planning panels, we have strived to achieve this, although it's not quite law. So comments on those would be useful, Stella. And thank you for your excellent report, by the way. Well done.
Thank you. Yes, in relation to biodiversity matters, the metric calculations have been provided as part of the application, which do indicate a net gain of 14.35% of habitat units and 92.59% net gain in terms of hedgerow units. And that's on the basis of the details as provided as part of the application in terms of biodiversity matters. So while the Environment Act is coming forward in January, as you reference, we have got policy G9, which requires a biodiversity net gain, which is an adopted policy and that we do seek for development. So it is achieving biodiversity net gain as required by policy G9.
Sure.
And in relation to the tree loss, sorry. So the applicant has suggested that they would be happy to carry out planting to local sites. We haven't got the detail of that submitted in front of us. They said that those conversations were ongoing at the time that they submitted that detail. So we haven't got the information to identify where those trees would be planted, and if that is appropriate mitigation, if it's locally relevant to the site, if it's a clear planning gain as part of the development. So on that basis, we don't have sufficient information and sufficient confidence that such planting as mitigation would be appropriate. And that is the reason why it's included within that reason for refusal in terms of insufficient mitigation in landscaping terms and tree loss terms.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Stevenson, before we move on to the comments, any other questions you probably have? Thank you. Do members have any comments? Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. Just one from me, really, in terms of the little superstore. We've got a little superstore in my ward, and I have to say, it doesn't surprise me that you've informed us that there's not been really any communication with them. In terms of delivery hours, that was brought up this morning at the site meeting, and you said that was between 8 AM and 8 PM. We've had problems with out of hours deliveries in our store. We've also had quite a bit of ASB issues, off-street parking as well. So unfortunately, they're not without the problems.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Anyone else? Councillor Stevenson and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I've struggled with this one. I've kept an open mind throughout. Obviously, my ward also neighbours this, and I've been monitoring the emails that have been coming in, and it's obviously quite an emotive issue. Naturally, I'm all for competition, so I think more supermarkets, etc., is great. It gives consumer choice. But what all the officers have put before for us, based on a plan-making process, whether we agree with it or not, a decision has clearly been made in terms of an allocation for housing. It's a shame that this has come as a hybrid application, really, with both retail and housing, because the actual care home element, personally, I think is a good one, and there's clearly some need in an area, and we all know that additional older people's housing frees up the market further down for everyone else to move up, which in turn releases the pressure on our greenbelt land to build more houses as well. Notwithstanding that, I wasn't sold on the design, but clearly we haven't got to that stage, and we could have done much better. But to me, I think if we've got a plan making process is there for a reason. I'm probably heartened by the fact that the objections we heard today have said that there is a desire to have an additional supermarket such as Lidl in the Wetherby area. It's just that I think there's a feeling that this site isn't appropriate based on the site planning process that's already been allocated for housing, and also, as we saw on site this morning, the traffic issues. So it is a difficult one, I think, but what's put before us is definitely a waiting on the planning process, and on that basis, I think if we were to uphold the officer's recommendation to refuse and the applicant was to appeal, I can't see any rationale as to why an inspector would overturn that, because we've got a plan making process for a reason, and doing so would obviously put greater pressure on sites that aren't allocated for housing. So I think it is a difficult one on balance, and my hope is that if we are to uphold the officer's recommendation, that that the applicants will engage with ward members and the council moving forward with an endeavour to find an alternative site for the retail elements of it, and that swiftly a new application would come in for delivery of housing on that site, so we don't see the hotel just have its steel curtains put on it and be left for another 10 years.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Excellent report that Stella's come up with. I'm normally one of the major critics of planning department. They are not exactly my, they don't necessarily like me because I tend to criticize them a lot. But in this instance, I think the quality of the report and the arguments that you put forward need to be complemented, because I do agree with the reasons for refusal that you've put out, and they've been well thought out, logically put forward, and also that finally we've got recognition of what a neighbourhood plan says. Again, I'm one of those people who argues that if a neighbourhood plan is put in place, it's put in for a reason, and you've acknowledged what the comments have been made, and I think it's being used properly in this instance in terms of taking things forward. And there is no doubt that finally we have got a plan-led approach. And if there are shortages of infrastructure, coming back to my normal self, that was up to planning to get it right when they allocated the site in the first place. They should have been asking for those infrastructure to be put in rather than leaving it to the market to fill the gaps thereafter. They should have insisted on that when they were first coming forward. But I have taken notice as well of the feeling, the split feeling there is definitely within the area. But overall, I think the arguments that have been put out today would mean that I will be happy to back the reasons for refusal.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hazelwood, and then Councillor Ray.
I just wanted to agree with Councillor Stevenson on most of what he said, which doesn't happen very often, but we do agree on this, absolutely. The housing element of this development is I absolutely agree with for all the reasons that Councillor Stevenson has made, that it does free up other houses further down the chain, the housing chain, and also we do need those houses for people who are retiring but don't want to live in a care home. Still have issues with the 4-bed, but that's another story. I'm not against this development, because I do agree with the housing element of it, and I agree that it is allocated for housing, and that's what the site needs to be, and the type of housing that is proposed I absolutely am 100% in favour of. It is really a difficult one, but yeah, I guess a lot of us just want to kind of reiterate that same feeling that we absolutely agree with the housing side of this development, but obviously there are issues with how the site has been allocated and the fact that it's a dual proposition that we've got in front of us, and it's difficult to it's difficult to agree one element of it. So we unfortunately we've got to we've got to look at it as a whole. But I would absolutely want to look at this as a housing development going forward, definitely, for with the reasons with the proposed type of housing that we've got in this proposition.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
A slightly different view from me. My problem, some of this, is the fact that the care home and the people who will be in the care home are some distance from the shops, which are narrow paths and 500 yards, then it climbs up a significant hill. Now, as somebody who's worked in this industry for a period of time, pushing a wheelchair or getting people into the town centre, I think that causes us a problem. Also, the lack of a local bus service that will be fit for purpose. I do use the word fit for purpose with, how can I put it, slightly tongue in cheek if I'm being fair, but I think there's issues around that as well. Now, how are you going to get people into Wetherby town centre, and the parking into there is also a problem for people. If you use a minibus, I think there's an issue there as well. Having tried to park in there many years ago and went round in circles for an hour or two, if I remember rightly. So that's my comment on it. I have concerns about how you would actually transport people, and whether people, as they get older, basically you'll be confining them to some extent to that care home, and that is not good for their health, and it's not good for the mental health either. So that's my concern on that.
Thank you. That's been helpful. Anyone else? In that case, David, could you sum up and reflect the debate before members can take the vote? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. From listening to the discussion, there seems to be a strong body of opinion which supports the reasons for refusal as set out in the panel report. That would be also subject to the amendments that Stella mentioned at the start. So reason 6 to refer to policy D2 from the Wetherby Neighbourhood Plan, and reason 4 to refer to policy SP13 from the core strategy. So that just leaves us really, Chair, with someone to move and second the recommendation.
Right, based on the summary that provided, does someone wants to move the recommendation? Councillor McKenna to move and Councillor Miller to second. All in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Right, item 8. The date and the time for the meeting will be on Thursday, 16th of November, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. That concludes the business of today's meeting. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. I now declare this meeting to be closed. Thank you.